This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Are there places in this world that are more open to traveling back and forth between this realm and the unseen realm? In other words, portals. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. That will be the topic of our discussion this week. Before we dive in, please take a moment. If you're watching on YouTube, I appreciate that. God bless you. Subscribe and click the button for notification, the bell for notifications. But I'll tell you before the end of this program, but once again, the censors have come in and basically canceled one of our programs going back 3 years. I'll tell you about that after the break today. But do yourself a favor, download our free mobile app, gilberthouse.org/app. Guarantees we will never be canceled. All of our archives are there as well and will not be canceled. You'll find it at gilberthouse.org/app. Also, vftb.net. You'll find the link in the top menu bar at the website there. Joining us for our monthly Iron and Myth discussion, the first of 2024, the author of the book Giants, Sons of the Gods, the 10th anniversary revised and expanded edition, conspiracy theory, co-author of The Angel of the Lord, a biblical historical theological study, and pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, Doug Van Dorn, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter of such novels as Cruel Logic, The Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse series, nonfiction books such as When Giants Were Upon the Earth, When Watchers Ruled the Nations, God Against the Gods, Brian Godawa, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, author of Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, Dr. Judd Burton. Well, fellas, it's a new year and episode now 25 of this series, which I'm honored and privileged to host with you fellas. Before we dive into what's going to be a fascinating discussion, I just want to ask your favor again to say hello to that special little boy that we said Merry Christmas to back in December, because between then and now he had a health scare where he was hospitalized for more than a week, RSV, but because of his other genetic issues, it really knocked him for a loop. And because he's had pneumonia in the past, he's more susceptible to it again. But he is on the mend now. He is beginning to smile again. I mean, this was a near thing. He was basically knocked out for several days while they intubated him and fed him oxygen, 100% oxygen flow, to make sure that his body was getting the oxygen he needed. So, Oliver, we just want to say, all of us, that we are very, very happy to see that you're back home again with your mom and dad and Theo. And we love seeing your videos, so we look forward to getting another video from you very, very soon. And we just wish you a wonderful time back at home. Pray you get better very, very soon.
Amen.
Amen.
So anyway, and Theo, by the way, thanks again for the laboratory. That's awesome. Portals. Let's start with probably the most famous portal in the Bible, which is the Tower of Babel. Usually when I've seen this taught in church, it's presented as an example of the hubris of man, thinking that somehow we can reach to the clouds and become one with the gods. But I would argue that whether it's Nimrod or someone else who built the Tower of Babel, I've got to believe that even 5,000 years ago, Mesopotamian structural engineers and architects understood you could not stack mud brick high enough to literally reach into heaven. Jed, let me throw it to you first. What did they think they were trying to build? And, maybe from there, we'll just try to figure out, why did God find it necessary to put a stop to it?
Well, a lot of these temples and ziggurats and what have you in the ancient world were considered houses of the gods in one sort or another, but they were also considered mountain effigies. And mountains in world religions are these symbols of the connection between the heavens and the earth. They're part of the earth, but they jut up into the heavens, and so this is where the gods lived. So they represent this intersection between profane space and sacred space. And this was something that was built into a lot of these kinds of ancient monuments in the antique world. And As such, they could be seen as entryways, gateways, portals between the celestial world and the world of men. And this seems to be very clear in the Tower of Babel account. There's something going on other than stacking bricks made of mud and straw going on here. That there is in fact a supernatural event, supernatural interaction that's taking place.
If I could throw something in too related to that, the very structure of the ziggurat is stair stepping up, and at the top they would have what would sometimes be called the white throne, which it would be, or the white temple, where that was the focal point where the high priests would then engage in their sacrifices to call down the gods. And also there's some scholarly argument that what was it? Was it Isaac or Jacob who saw the vision of the stairway to heaven?
Yeah.
Right.
Jacob,
right? So yeah. Jacob, and there's some good possibility that was a ziggurat, and so even in the in other words, we're not just conjecturing. This is actually part of the very concept behind all the ziggurat structures, and so then when it's interesting too, because then in the passage in Genesis 11, when God actually says, "Let us go down," that's a kind of a reflection of the beliefs that they would call down the gods and meet. They would go up the stairs, and then the gods would come down and meet them in that temple. So it's kind of interesting that God himself is even sort of using that language as a, I would say it's a mockery, obviously, because he's actually not engaging it. But there's always that polemical nature that I think is a real helpful tool in understanding and interpreting scripture. When you see it, it helps bring to light more of the ancient Near Eastern context, which is what we always like to talk about.
Even in the names of the ziggurats, this is in a paper that John Walton wrote years ago on the idea of a ziggurat, and he listed a few names of them, and some of them are things like Temple of the Stairway to Pure Heaven, or Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, or Temple which links heaven and earth. These are the names that they actually called the ziggurats.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting that the temple of the moon god, the great temple, the great ziggurat of Ur, was partly rebuilt by Saddam Hussein. When you translate that name, it means Temple of the Foundation of Terror. Which, yeah,
wouldn't be surprising. Yeah.
Oddly prophetic.
Well, if I can say something too, just something tangential. Maybe I shouldn't go there, but if you look at Hammurabi's some of the inscriptions, Hammurabi, when he describes the foundation of his kingdom, he describes it as the creation of the heavens and the earth. And I think Etemenanke is the name of the temple, which is the foundation of heaven and earth. So I think there's that creation motif that's connected to those temples, which are reflections of mountains, etc., which is where the gods dwell. Yeah, it's a network, a patch network of concepts and ideas, which is fascinating.
The temple of Enki at the ancient city of Eridu was likely the location of Babel. At least that's the conclusion I've reached. Other scholars have made the case for other locations. We've seen articles recently arguing that the Entemenanke, the temple of Marduk in Babylon, was probably the Tower of Babel. This probably much older, the actual Tower of Babel, Eridu. The temple of Enki, the Lord of the Abyss, the Abzu, goes back, according to the excavations that have been done there at Eridu, which is in southeastern Iraq. It used to be on the shore of the Persian Gulf, but silt has pushed the shore back about 75 miles. It is the oldest and would have been the largest ziggurat in all of Mesopotamia. The oldest levels go back to 5,000 BC, they think. There's like 18 levels that have been found. And some of the levels are below there's an 8-foot deposit of silt between two of the levels, which suggests a massive flood, interestingly. And the last level, level 1, which would have been the most recent, would have been the biggest ziggurat in all of Mesopotamia, except it was never finished. The archaeologists in 1949, just kind of almost in passing, mentioned that the abandonment of this level coincided with the end of the Uruk period of history, which is about 3100 BC, before the rise of Sumer as a great power. So given that this was an important religious center in Mesopotamia for thousands of years, I mean, even down to the time of Hammurabi and 1,200 years beyond, down to the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the kings of Akkad and Sumer would often refer to themselves as the king of Eridu. Even after it was no longer an important city, it was still a very important religious site. And again, this was the home of the god Enki, who was the god who sent forth the Apkallu to deliver the gifts of civilization to humankind. What connection might that have had, the fact that the temple was literally called the Abzu, the house of the abyss? And if this theory is correct, that was the Tower of Babel, the Tower of the God Gate or Gate of Gods, why did God in Genesis 11 say, behold, they are one people, they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so they may not understand one another's speech. Why did God have to stop it? Could they have actually opened a portal to the bottomless pit?
This is right up Judd's alley right here.
I was ruminating on that. World mythology is replete with interactions between groups of humans, individual humans, and the gods, and the precedent seems to be set there that such a thing would be possible. We already know that even prescriptions in the Old Testament against things like necromancy that we've discussed on this show illustrate that not only was God saying don't do this, but that it was possible to do it. Clearly, one of the ideas that I've worked on over the years with, I say clearly, in my mind anyway, one of the ideas that I worked with on and off over the last couple of years with Dr. Aaron Judkins is this idea about the location of Göbekli Tepe and the Garden of Eden, that the Watchers didn't understand exactly where Eden was, but they had a general idea, and it was this strange place where heaven and earth touched, this place where Adam and Eve were actually interacting with Yahweh. My thinking is that in a Tower of Babel sort of way, they had hoped to weaponize Eden to either convince the angel that was guarding the east gate to side with them or overpower him or whatever, and use Eden as a way to lay in a similar kind of assault that the Tower of Babel would have provided. So I think we're looking at similar events, and again, we could spend the rest of the show on those kinds of examples of interactions between the celestial realm and groups of humans or individual humans. But I think that sites in Turkey like Novali Charia, Göbekli Tepe, now Karahan Tepe, illustrate that there was Watcher activity there, and that sort of activity was not only possible, but it was potentially actionable. Otherwise, there would not have been such drastic measures taken against it when it was. And so, in much the same way that we have prescriptions in the Old Testament against those kinds of activities, it didn't mean that they weren't possible.
One of the things that startled me in the research for the Second Coming of Saturn was looking into the history of the Hurrian people, the Horites of the Bible. Sharon put me onto this when she found a paper about the ancient city of Urkesh, which is the oldest urban center of the Hurrians, the Horites. This is in northern Syria, very close to the border with Turkey today. And they had a temple there that dates to the middle of the 4th millennium BC, about 3500 BC. But according to the archaeologists who excavated there, it looked very much like the temples found from that period in southern Mesopotamia, in Sumer. In other words, it was similar in construction and architecture to what we would have found at Ur and Uruk and Eridu in that same period of time. And one of the main features of the Hurrian religion was this necromantic ritual pit called the Abi, A-B-I. A scholar back in the 1960s named Harry Hofner argued etymologically that the Sumerian word Abzu, from which we get the Greek word abyss, came from the Hurrian rather than the other way around. The Sumerians weren't the origin. They derived from the Hurrians, which makes sense from a biblical historical perspective, since the Hurrians were in the north, closer to the Caucasus Mountains, where the Ark of Noah would have come to rest. But that word Abi also is an origin for the Semitic word Ov, meaning one who communicates with the dead, necromancer, and the Ovarim, the travelers, a term applied by the Canaanites to the spirits of the Rephaim. So with this Eridu and Abzu connection to this group of people who came from the Caucasus region, as the Hurrians did, bringing with them the idea of this necromantic ritual pit. The Witch of Endor that Saul consulted, to summon the spirit of Samuel from the earth, was called an Ov, which again derives from that older Hurrian word that is at least 2,000 years older than the story of Saul and the Witch of Endor. When we talk about portals, are we talking about specific physical locations, or are they portals because the people who are working at them are doing something spiritual? Are they inviting this sort of supernatural activity?
Yeah, this isn't like Stargate, like science. You could just create the science and open up a wormhole. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things I want to address in this conversation, because I think the term gets thrown around and people will say, well, that spiral in the sky over Norway, that was a portal. Yeah. Okay, no, it was a rocket that misfired, but whatever, maybe. But yeah, rather than, okay, we get the chevrons lined up and we can then go through to another world. The Hurrians were doing this almost every place they set up shop. In fact, there may be some evidence, and I was just reading a paper last night and rereading something I'd overlooked in research at a site, Doug, that we had hoped to see in our little pre-tour expedition back in March at the southwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, Bet Yerah, which means house or temple of the moon god. They found a site there that had been occupied by Horites who had arrived around 2800 BC. And there's this building where they found these, they call it the Circles building because they don't know what to make of it. This big building that may have had some ritual purpose, but these big circular holes that have been dug in the ground that they thought, what are these granaries? Are these? And it dawned on me last night as I was reading this paper, which I'd read for the first time like 4 years ago. It's like, maybe this was a site with multiple abis, ritual pits. Who knows? I mean, they don't know. Scholars don't know, but this is something these people took with them as part of their religious system. Is it possible that we can set up a portal wherever we are, or are there physical places that have some special significance, like Babel, like Mount Hermon, like Caesarea Philippi?
Maybe let's step back for a minute. Just the kind of the way I think of it. I don't know if this is just me or if this is other people or not, but I know that it's at least me. When I hear the word portal, that kind of spooks me. The word spooks me. It makes me think of things that are sci-fi, or things that just they're not real. They're fantastical. Mm-hmm. But so I was kind of thinking as I was trying to wonder, well, what could I bring to this conversation? I think one of the things I wanted to do was to both demystify the word portal, but then also to kind of bring in the mysticism of the word at the same time, kind of play on opposites. And so when you think about what a portal is, you can demystify it by just thinking about, like what Judd was talking about, the movement from the movement to sacred space. But it doesn't even have to be that. So like when I'm outside and I'm playing around in my yard and then I come in through my door, I've entered into a portal. Now it's not any kind of a supernatural portal, but it's a change of space. And when you think about the purpose of what a sanctuary is, the way that medieval people built churches, I believe the way even the tabernacle and the temple of the Old Testament were designed, you're moving as you go in through a door into a different space. You're traveling into sacred space. That's a portal, right? Now, the supernatural idea of that comes like in the tabernacle, because God says, I'm going to put my presence into the most holy part of this space. And so now you've got this place that God has designed that the natural and the supernatural can come together and talk, like Moses used to talk with the Lord face to face. The man talks with another man. But he had to do that by going through a portal. So what I want to suggest to people is that don't be spooked by the word portal necessarily, although maybe you could be. But portals are we see portals all over the place. When you go onto the internet and you hit Google and then you go into a website, you're going through a portal of some kind. It's a portal. Portals are everywhere. So that's my idea of kind of demystifying it. But then as soon as you start thinking about the fact that there is a supernatural world, right? And can you make contact with that supernatural world? Now the portal idea becomes much more mystical. And then the questions of how do you do that, and are there places that you go? Those become really important to talk about. And I think about, we start off with the mountain idea. That's a kind of a portal of itself. Just it's by its nature. It's a between place. Trees are like this in the Bible. Like you'll find Amos under the tree when God calls him, or you find Abraham under the tree in Genesis 18 when God comes to him. This is not an accident. I mean, you find that all over the ancient world with druids, hanging out underneath the oak trees and eating the acorns and all that kind of stuff. It's a kind of a portal. Idols are portals of a sort, right? Where you incant the deity into the stone or the wood, and then you try to manipulate it in that kind of a way. So I think for the most part, my opinion is for the most part, you can kind of create a portal wherever you want to. I'm not opposed to the idea that there are maybe certain places on the earth that are maybe more predisposed to, I don't know how that works. You talk about ley lines, or you talk about the sacred geometry of a place like Mount Hermon or whatever. I'm not opposed to that idea, but I think for the most part, what you were saying, Derek, earlier about you just build a place and then you incant something, or you do a ritual or however you do it, right, that creates a portal.
If I could chime in for a second, what is ritual at the end of the day? It's the ceremonial reenactment of mythology. That's a pretty standard anthropological definition of ritual. So what's going on here? In one way, shape, or form, some aspect of a culture's mythology, the personalities that are involved, an episode in a story about the gods or something is being enacted. In the case of these necromantic pits, you're dealing with the underworld and all of the denizens of the underworld. And so there certainly is a historical precedent for the creation of sacred space through ritual. You ritualize a place. What's actually taking place? There are people that are actively trying to create a portal and either literally or metaphorically walk through this portal to contact the supernatural realm. And so it's well documented over all of human history that is possible. So it seemed to me that both contexts are applicable here. You have places on the planet that seem to be more attuned, if you will, to creating these kinds of things, but they can also be created via some sort of ritual. Otherwise, also from a demonological perspective, we wouldn't have, even if some of those accounts are not true, we wouldn't have such a tradition of these entities showing up within ritual space, as if coming through a portal.
Brian, you wrote a couple of characters into your Chronicles of the Nephilim novel about Moses. Or was it the Chronicles of the Watchers with Moses versus the gods of Egypt, where Janus and Jambres were part of that. So you had to do some research into the practice of magic, at least as far as the ancient Egyptians were concerned.
Yeah.
Did they literally believe they could, within a certain defined space? I mean, even if it's like, and I found this to be interesting too, in researching the ancient Hurrian practices, they actually did this whole scribing a magic circle on the floor with a circle of salt. I mean, it's almost like Doctor Strange, where he kind of spins his hands and you create a portal and you jump through. Did the Egyptians have that sort of a belief?
I did not find much of that. A lot of their magic had to do with incantations. Now that's not to say that there isn't, because I don't know, I don't research it exhaustively, but yeah. So a lot of the magic had to do with incantations and a lot of mythology and such, but I don't remember stumbling across anything similar to the pits that we've talked about, which do have a lot of examples, as well in Canaan and such, So yeah, not so much there, but there is a sort of a, the pit thing is a reflection or a connection to the abyss, which you've already mentioned, and the abyss, even in the ancient Near East, but also in the, Israelite, the biblical paradigm, the abyss was the dark waters, not just the seas that we have, but it's the dark waters beneath Sheol. But they also had sort of access points that would come up to the earth, where you could access the abyss. And I think, of course, it was very, if you read, was it Michael Hurwitz? He talks about that across the whole Mesopotamian paradigm. There's a lot of variations. There's not a lot of consistency at times, but nevertheless, some of the ideas was that this abyss did have some connecting points. For example, as we've often talked about, at the Grotto of Pan, where even Josephus, as our very illustrious Jewish historian, had wrote about that in that cave where we know to be the gates of hell. That's where Jesus was talking about. He was literally talking about that. They called it the gates of hell. And there actually was a deep kind of a fissure of some kind with a cliff of some kind. And in fact, I took down what Josephus wrote about it. He said that there's a dark cave, that's the cave that is the grotto, opens itself, within which there is a horrible precipice that descends abruptly to a vast depth. It contains a mighty quantity of water, which is immovable. And when anybody lets down anything to measure the depth of the earth beneath the water, no length of cord is sufficient to reach it. Now, is that really true? No, and I'm not familiar with. I've never been able to go inside that cave, so I don't know. But certainly this idea was that they thought that was a connection to the abyss, and so that was part of that mystical occultic connection that could be accessed, and not to.
So
be,
in that case, you're saying that the actual place itself lends itself to being a portal.
Yeah, but it also makes sense that the occultic rituals are formed around that place because for whatever reason, maybe all that, since that was already there, they saw it as that, and then they developed their mythology around it and developed their rituals around it. But nevertheless, it was at the foothills of Mount Hermon, and which we've talked about extensively. It fits that paradigm really well, and it makes sense that's where they'd be. And then it makes sense that's why Jesus would attack it, because he is literally, attacking that mountain of the gods and that portal of the abyss, and saying his kingdom is the one that is militarily against that. You know what I mean? So that fits pretty well in there. But there's one other abyss that was really interesting. So this one I brought into my Chronicles of the Apocalypse series. That was about the first century and such. And there was a interesting, Jewish legends. So there's, as we've talked about, there's a lot of pseudepigrapha, and there's a lot of tomes written that are claimed to be Solomon, like the Testament of Solomon, the Odes of Solomon, the Psalms of Solomon. Well, in the Testament of Solomon, Solomon has this reputation of becoming this, with through incantations and through a signet ring that he had, that he could control demons, even so much so that he forced demons to help build the temple, which is kind of silly. But nonetheless, this was the legend. But part of that was that they believed that there was a foundation stone. There was a part of when David, before the temple was built, David was digging down, and he digging down where that temple would be built, and he found this foundation stone, and it had a name on it or something, and he wasn't supposed to lift it because the abyss was beneath it. So there's this whole mythology there, that there's that connection. And I think, didn't Raiders of the Lost Ark, did they have the ark was in that hole beneath the altar? Was that in Raiders?
It was in Egypt.
It was in Egypt, but yeah.
Because I could swear I saw some movie where they were arguing that anyway.
It's probably a Ron Wyatt movie.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah. But there actually is, the point is there actually is like tunnels beneath the altar, beneath the Holy of Holies,
Yes.
Who knows when they were made. But it's kind of an interesting sort of connection there. But, and so that whole thing of the abyss, Solomon then sort of, he threw the stone back in there to seal the abyss so that they couldn't come up and destroy the world, and they built the temple. It's interesting.
That's really
legend.
No, that is really interesting, and I actually wrote about that a little bit in Second Coming of Saturn, because that area below the foundation stone is referred to as the Well of Souls.
That's it.
The Well of Souls. It's based on a medieval Islamic legend that's where the souls of the dead can be heard crying out for resurrection. But according to scholars who've been down there, archaeologists have been down there, it's a partly natural cave that's been expanded out, and there's a prayer area in there that is a Muslim prayer area. But there's some drawings. A pilgrim went to this back in 1859 and did a watercolor drawing of it. You can find this at the Book of Knowledge, Wikipedia, and it is interesting because if this is in fact a natural cave that existed since whenever, now we're back to the Hurrians again, because that is the threshing floor of Arana, and Arana is a Hurrian word that means Lord or King. So it was the Hurrians were the Jebusites who controlled the city before David took it, and they still had control of it even until David went and bought it from him to stop the destroying angel sent by God, who was poised over that site with his drawn sword. So did the Hurrians, who occupied the city that would later become David's capital and the site of the temple that Solomon built, is that built over one of these portals used by the Hurrians, who seem to be the ones who took this concept of summoning gods from the netherworld from the region? You can't make this up. The archaeologists have traced these people back to the Ararat Plain. That's where they originate.
Exactly. And where did they get? How old? How ancient is that practice? If we're talking, because we're just starting to scratch the surface of how antique some of those peoples and the languages were in Anatolia. How many millennia had they been doing that?
Well, it's the same place. The origin point of the Hurrians, who were referred to in the pre-4th millennium as the Kura-Araxes civilization, because those are the names of the rivers on either side of the Caucasus Mountains, the Kura and the Araxes. Their origin point is exactly where you pinpoint the origin of the word that became Rephaim in Semitic, but also the word that or the phoneme if that's the right term for the word that refers to royalty
right,
in the
morpheme.
Eurasian languages.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Morpheme. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so we're clearly back into the 4th millennium BC, because that city of the Hurrians, Urkesh, they date to about the middle of the 4th millennium, so 3500 BC. But they probably, the Kura-Araxes people probably originated in the Ararat Plain region about 1,000 years before that. So we're into the 5th millennium BC. So this is a very old practice. But the point is they appear to have taken it to Sumer, or the Sumerians originated in the same region and moved south and took that with them. And clearly it ended up in the land of Canaan, because King Saul knew exactly where to find, or at least his advisors knew exactly to find, an owner of a ritual pit the night before he was killed by the Philistines. And I just think it's fascinating. We don't know what Araunah and the Jebusites were doing in Jerusalem before David took it, but the existence of this cave that Muslims call the Well of Souls, directly beneath what would have become Solomon's temple, is fascinating. And again, it just points to the existence of locations that appear to have been special for some reason. Brian, you mentioned earlier Jacob seeing what we call Jacob's ladder, but the word in Hebrew really refers to the shape of a ziggurat, the step pyramid. Yeah. Interestingly, we didn't go to the when we went there back in 2018, Brian, did we go to the Temple Institute?
Not that I remember.
Okay. I think we went in 2019 then. Anyway, the design for the third temple that the Temple Institute has on display has same crow step pattern along the roofline.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And when you go to Petra, you see that same pattern on all the tombs of the Nabateans from the first century BC, 1st century AD on all the tombs. So this idea was conveyed into the modern world, and or at least into the Christian era, let's say. But then you've got Bethel, Carmel, which means vineyard of God, but vineyard of El, perhaps, because it was called that before the Israelites got there. And the oak, Doug, you mentioned oaks. In fact, I looked this up because oaks or terebinths in the Bible are often appear to be sacred places. I mean, when Abraham first got to Canaan in Genesis 12, God met him at the oak of Moreh and said, okay, this land is going to belong to your descendants. And later, that's where Jacob buried the household idols that he'd stolen from Laban there.
I tend to think, I don't know, Judd, you can chime in on this. I've never talked to you about it, but I tend to think that the reason for this is because the trees and the mountains are really doing the same thing conceptually. So you have the rock that's in the bottom, holding the thing down, and so it's connected to the underworld, and then it juts up into the air and connects itself to the heavens. I think the trees are conceptually the same thing, and it's really, that goes back to the idea of the world tree, Yggdrasil and stuff like that in Nordic mythology, where you have this well at the bottom and it's connecting with the snake at the bottom, and then you've got the leaves going into the top, and Ezekiel makes this, he makes that image of, I forget, the king of Assyria or king of Egypt, one of those, as he's the world tree. Daniel does the same thing with Nebuchadnezzar. You're the world tree. I think that's in Daniel chapter 4. And so I think that's the idea behind the tree being such a place of portals.
Well, and then back to the original world tree, the tree of life and the Garden of Eden.
In the Garden of Eden, right? Exactly.
Agreed.
Yeah, this site of Shechem is something that I find really, really interesting. And again, the tree, the oak of Moreh, or the diviner's oak in Judges chapter 9, which is the conspiracy raised by Gideon's son by a concubine, Abimelech. And the city of Shechem rebels against him, and they lure the people of Shechem out of the city, and the army then comes down from the area of the diviner's oak, which is probably that oak of Moreh, which was on that... the mountain that we did get to see, Doug. We didn't get to Joshua's altar back in March, but we were over there at Mount Kavir, which is the location of a Jewish religious community now called Ilan Moreh, which means Oak of Moreh.
And there's oak trees that are there that are just out in the middle of nowhere on the side of this mountain that are ancient, man. Who knows how far back the seeds of that particular tree go. It's very
what's interesting here, and I was looking for this verse while we were talking, Judges 9:37, and Abimelech's ally Gaal spoke again and said, look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and the word translated center of the land actually means navel of the land, as in belly button. Yeah. It's an omphalos. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a axis mundi. In some ways, the cross is doing both of these things. Because the cross is the world tree in one sense, and in another sense, it's the cosmic mountain, because Jesus talks about the angels will ascend and descend on the Son of Man, and I think it's also in John chapter 3 where he describes himself as the serpent that's lifted up like Moses. So all of these ideas really find their biblical, their orthodox, their correct use in Christ. And that's one of the things that I was just thinking about this in kind of the opposite way till it popped into my mind, the cross. But it's weird to me that you've got these guys hanging out under trees, like they know what they're doing. And my question is, are they supposed to be doing this? Like, is it kind of like the equivalent of doing ayahuasca and let's just see what happens? I don't know. I think it's really interesting, but my point is that whatever we make of what Abraham was doing, or some of these judges were doing under the trees, biblically speaking, it's always that God is the one who's supposed to choose where this place will be, and we end up obeying and going through the portals that He has ordained for us to go through, instead of creating our own portals. That's really the distinction between biblical religion and all other religions.
Well said.
Well said. I think that, I think that's what sums it up for me, Doug, is that portals are essentially wherever we are. If we give permission to the spirit realm, we become that portal.
Well, and think about why that is, Derek. It's because, let's go back to the temple idea in the Old Testament. So if the temple is in some ways a replica of the Garden of Eden, and the Garden of Eden is on the mountain, it's part of this whole motif of a cosmic mountain for sure. And then it's also got these trees that are, the palm trees and stuff that are embedded in the linens and whatever, and maybe even on the person of the high priest and his dress and whatever. So that's the portal that we talked about earlier that God has ordained in the Old Testament. But what is the portal in the New Testament? Well, it's the new temple, which is the Christian, the body of Christ on earth. And so I think that is the theological explanation for why it is that wherever the Christian is, there's a portal there. That's why God hears us when we pray, because the Holy Spirit is now indwelling us, because we are the temple of God.
Yeah.
And that's especially true. Let me put this one final thing on it. This is especially true when the church itself gathers together corporately, because we're very individualistic Christians in America, and so we have the individualistic side of that, but the corporate church side of this is equally as important, but not talked about enough, I don't think, in our present evangelical culture.
I was just going to reinforce that Hebrews is where it talks about very clearly that the new covenant in Christ and the body of Christ as Christ on earth is Mount Zion, the heavenly Mount Zion. It's the temple, and the Mount Zion was the Mount Zion that is the temple, the mountain portal of God battling Mount Bashan, right? And that God is saying, that one, my mountain will take over your mountain, and Jesus says that himself, right? And it's like God's taking over the portals, But the body of Christ. This is the community, the collective side of the truth in scriptures that we as Americans, I think, don't fully grasp or understand because of our individualism, and I'm guilty of that myself. So I think your word to that is really, really something to ponder.
And considering the research or the paper of Charles Torrey back in the 1930s, the Harvard Theological Review, on the meaning of the phrase Har Moed, and that as the origin of the transliterated word Armageddon. Yeah, Har Moed, meaning Mount of Assembly or Mount of the Congregation, which all end times Bible prophecy teachers should be required to learn because there is no mountain at Megiddo, and Megiddo is 50 miles away from where Zechariah says Jesus returns anyway. Regardless of when it happens, where is going to be at Jerusalem, which again is this the true axis mundi, the true navel of the world, the connection point between this world and the next. This whole spiritual war appears to be, if you take Isaiah 14 literally, a battle between the divine rebels' Mount of Assembly and the Lord's Mount of Assembly. And we could do another hour just on that. So is it Mount Zephon? Is it Mount Hermon? Is it, which artificial mountain, or is it Babel, the artificial mountain? Which mountain is actually going to step up and try to take on Zion? I mean, you look at Solomon, who got deceived into creating high places for some of these fallen Elohim on the Mount of Olives, so that when you looked out of his temple to the east, you would see the high places for Astarte and Chemosh and Molech up there on the hill, looking down on God's Mount of Assembly. And, of course, Jesus spent just about the last week of his life just dividing his time between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount, teaching in the temple, which I think was, deliberate. Well, like everything else he did, it was deliberate. So whose portal will win? I'm putting my money on the one who spoke the universe into creation.
Amen.
What do you guys think about modern portals? So ideas like, I brought up earlier drugs.
Yeah.
Or one thing I've heard more and more people talking about this. I thought it was kind of me that just had this idea. I don't know if it's weird or insane or whatever, but like a nuclear bomb going off and creating a portal because you don't know what you're doing with the world, or all kinds of modern kinds of portals that people are either unwittingly or wittingly entering into. What should we as Christians say to that kind of stuff?
Large Hadron Collider.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things we can think about, right?
Pop culture level, in the season 3 of the Twin Peaks series, where David Lynch did 25 years after, he actually had this demonic entity that was responsible for basically most of the crimes in the series, going all the way back to the original one, entered this world through the nuclear testing in the American Southwest, in New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So on a pop culture level, speaking to what you just said, Doug, that we tend to think that way, because we're conditioned that way on some level by TV and cinema and books and things like that. That there could possibly be this supernatural link between what we would consider a scientific operation and the making of some sort of portal. Godzilla.
Yeah.
And now, especially since Godzilla and these other monsters have been rebranded in the Legendary series, the Monsterverse, as the Titans, the original and rightful rulers of Earth. That's
But how about this question for Brian? Movies as portals. And I'm thinking specifically because you just brought up Godzilla, and they're like rebranding all this. They're bringing it to us. We've talked about this before with the Avengers and the superheroes from the DC world, and kind of the bringing back of the gods. What are your thoughts about movies as portals and bringing this kind of stuff into the modern world?
No, that's a good point. Now, I'm not a big Godzilla fan. I've enjoyed some of them, but I've just seen some of the other giant monster movies. And nowadays, the current mythology is basically that it's because we've sinned against Mother Earth, and that's why they're rising up, right? So it's against not climate and the Earth itself, which that's what it always is. Whatever new generation of God or deity or devil that the generation conceives of, that becomes the motivating factor behind all horror and that kind of thing. In a sense, it's the Frankenstein. It's always Frankenstein, in my opinion. Again, the greatest horror story of all time, because it is the most universal, I think, story that everything comes back to, even those told before the story was created. But nonetheless, this concept of our hubris, of humanity in our hubris, we do create things that open up evil that comes back and goes against us. And I think that that's a good notion, but you can service different religions, obviously. Yeah. So, but movies themselves, literally, well, yeah, that's a good. There are Christians who argue that just watching, movies or series about demons and stuff like that you are opening yourself up to it. I think, it's fair that they would argue that. So I think we should address that, because those of us here, we watch a lot of this stuff, much like Paul studied the pagan mythologies of his day. We do that as well. But while that's one issue, the other side is, though, that, like, I would argue the superheroes is certainly probably the superhero mythology is one of the closest things to what you're suggesting, Doug, in my opinion. Because, most of the movies and series and stuff, I see it as entertainment, and if you're looking at it, you're judging it. But superheroes as a phenomenon, it's become so over engulfing. It's like a world mythology that I really do see it as this is how Greeks told their stories, and how they dominated the world with their mythology. So why wouldn't movies and series of the superheroes, for example, be the dominant supplanter of certainly at least the Christian God, for sure, as well as Islam or whatever, but nonetheless the Christian God. And if anything could be a portal by engaging, by embracing, by entering into, not by observing it. Obviously just observing it doesn't necessarily mean you're engaging in the portal, but couldn't it be considered those who embrace the mythology, the MCU, the Marvel universe, study it, exegete it, follow it on every level. Could that not be considered a form of religion? And I think you could argue that it is. It could be, depending on the individual, right?
And I think you could take that further into the realm of MMORPGs, the role-playing games, especially as augmented reality and virtual reality become more realistic and more immersive. That's an idea I'm exploring in a novel I'm working on right now, but cool. we'll see how well I do it. But Sharon actually wrote an essay on this for God's Ghostbusters, which was an anthology that Tom Horn put out years ago. Your Brain on Virtual Sin. People who go to these films, like you suggest, Brian, like so for example, torture porn, slasher films. Yeah. Like the original Saw movie, for example, had a really compelling plot, but after that, it seemed like they just devolved into how much blood can we spatter across the screen. And there are a lot of movies like that, and there are people who really enjoy those.
How bizarre can we make the evil? Absolutely.
Right.
So what I want to say about this, though, too, lest we be misunderstood or perceived as the typical fundamentalist sort of, listen to that rock and roll music is the devil. I could see how people could get that misunderstanding, maybe even listening to this content. But we have more nuance, I would argue, in that the key element that we've brought up is, despite the physicality and the locations and et cetera, there's this component of the ritual, or what would really be simplified as being you have to open yourself up. So it's opening yourself up to giving yourself over to the mythology, the concepts, the beings that I would argue would be similar to when you do the Ouija board. You do the Ouija board, and this is something that movies have really done a good job of communicating, that, the story logic of horror is you have to open yourself up to these demons in order for them to come in. Well, that's actually literally true. But that's more on a spiritual, occultic level, the Ouija board. And it makes sense. Yeah, you're opening up. Oh, spirits, tell us whatever, right? That's a logic that makes sense. But then can just enjoying superhero mythology, can it become something similar? Yes. Does it mean it all is? No. But if you seek it and embrace it and enter into it as a viable world, a model for understanding your world or for communicating your beliefs about the world with, you don't have to believe they're really real, but it just becomes the religion that is the substitute for Yahweh, for the true God. And in that sense, you are at what point, which is on an individual level, do you open yourself up to this alternate idolization? It's an idolatry. Rather than, we would read a Greek myth and we don't open ourselves up to it. We're studying it to understand it or whatever, Canaan mythology, occultic mythology. We're doing that as Christians to understand it, to be able to communicate truth against it. But that's different than embracing and entering into as your sort of, on the surface, there's this entertainment, it's amusement, it's finding whatever pleasure in life through amusement. But how deep do you go? And I think it's worthy of challenging people to consider. Well, I pointed a person say, oh, you're opening yourself up to demons. I don't know the people's hearts, but I would certainly challenge people to consider that. To what degree are you opening yourself up to this entertainment, if you will? Call it that. That's fine. Open yourself to the entertainment to be the meaning manufacturer. What am I thinking? The meaning factory, the thing that creates meaning for you in this world. And I can keep going, but I won't.
We saw a really tragic version of that story some years back. You remember the two girls in Wisconsin who took a third girl friend of theirs out into the woods and tried to sacrifice her to a creation, a creepypasta, which was sort of a crowdsourced horror character called Slender Man.
Yeah.
And this bears some relation to an Eastern concept called the Tulpa, where you basically focus so intensely on an imaginary friend that it takes on reality. What happens when you get thousands or even millions of people focusing on Slender Man or Laughing Jack or any number of these other creepypasta characters? Do you create a portal, or do you just give a demon access to your own heart? I would suggest it's probably the latter, which kind of circles back around to what we had discussed here. The portal is wherever you are. The one question I would leave, because this has been nagging at me for a long time, and I don't want to leave this topic before we address it. Jesus, when he was with us, could have taken his disciples on the road to Caesarea Philippi and said, okay, now look, we all know what the pagans believe about this place. They think this is literally the connecting point between heaven above and the netherworld below. Okay, we've got the Canaanite Olympus behind us. We've got the gate to hell, Hades, right over here. This is not how any of this works.
But we know.
It all depends. Yeah, he could have said that. He could have said, this is not how this works. This is not... They're wrong about all of this, but instead he didn't. He went right there and declared his divinity at the base of the mountain. Then he climbed the mountain for the transfiguration. So if the portal is wherever we are and how we open ourselves up to the spirit realm, which of course is why Moses was given very explicit instructions by God, don't consult with wizards, don't consult with necromancers, don't consult with mediums. Why did Jesus not say, okay, this idea here that Mount Hermon is special, forget that. That's wrong. Why did he make a point of going there to declare his divinity?
It's because portals are real.
Yeah. Well, in both the geographically localized ones and the ones that are ritually enhanced and created.
Sure.
And I think that that very mission to Mount Hermon Paneas demarcates that and illustrates that both of those things exist.
Brian, I was thinking about what you said, and my mind went to the idea of faith. So believers have faith, and that's why, the Holy Spirit indwells them. And that's it seems to me that that's the counter to what you were talking about in the pagan world, that you open yourself up to it. Well, what is that? It's a kind of faith, really.
Yeah. Or you give yourself to.
And you give yourself to it.
And it's important to understand what we're talking about here. You don't have to believe that. No, I'm not saying people, I believe there are superheroes and they're, that's not and the Greeks didn't either.
Much more subtle than that.
Yeah, it can stay entertainment as far as I'm concerned. The point is are you giving yourself to it as this gives me meaning, this gives me purpose? Like you said, faith is not, I believe that superheroes exist. No, your faith is, I believe this entertaining universe gives me a sense of meaning and purpose because of these transcendent beings, the stories of the transcendent beings, which is at the end, it's a mythology, it's a narrative, and that's what a religion is. It's a narrative, whatever you're following, your narrative, So yeah.
And demons will be happy to take advantage of that and lure people into devoting themselves to it. Well, fascinating. I know that we've only scratched the surface, and we could do another hour here standing on our heads, I think, with just additional questions. But to keep this to a reasonable length, we will cut here. We will commune offline and see what we can come up with for Iron and Myth 26 next month. But until then, Dr. Judd Burton, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Brian Godawa, gentlemen, as always, fascinating and an honor to host this program, and we'll talk again next month.
See you.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks.
Check the show notes below this video or audio, wherever you are watching or listening, for links to the websites for Dr. Judd Burton, Brian Godawa, and Pastor Doug Van Dorn. And please do follow their work and read their stuff. I don't just say this because they're on this program. I genuinely respect and like these guys. And we will be going to Israel together in 2025, at least three of us. We're trying to talk Brian into it. We'll tell you more about that. Also, how YouTube has spiked another one of our programs. And, the prosecuting attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, says the only reason anyone is pointing out her prosecutorial ethical issues is, it's because of her skin color. Bless her pointy little head. That is straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues. Sharon and I really appreciate your support, and that's why every single month we want to make a special offer available to you at the Gilbert House store. And now that we're into the holidays, we're offering extra specials.
We really are. Last year we had some holiday specials that people just really enjoyed getting. Lots and lots of you went and ordered there, and we thank you for that. We're doing the same thing this year. Lots of great deals, including Red Wing Saga specials, Derek's book specials, and blowout prices on all of our DVDs.
Yes, but if you prefer streaming video, so you get instant access in full HD.
And no shipping.
And no shipping, right. We've got special discounts available now at our online streaming site, gilberthouse.org/video. That includes even our full-length travelogumentaries, our Wars of the Gods Volume 1 and Volume 2, now at a special discounted price through the end of January.
That is such a deal. And by the way, those of you who have loved Vicki Joy Anderson's book, They Only Come Out at Night, that book is also on special December and January.
We want to make this information available to you. We understand that around the holidays, finances get a little tight, so we're offering special pricing on just about everything in our online store. We're all in the middle of a battlefield.
We are.
And we all need good information. Please take advantage of our special offers, gilberthouse.org/video and gilberthouse.org/store. And thank you for your prayers and support.
Amen.
Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net, gilberthouse.org, gilberthouse.org, and derekpgilbert.com. You'll find us on social media at View from Bunker. My personal, actually it's X now, the X account for my own personal self at Derek Gilbert. Facebook, View from the Bunker, Truth Social, Gab Me, We Get Her at Derek P. Gilbert, and Threads. Also, Again, if you would, take a moment. If you're watching on YouTube, if you've subscribed, that's great. Click the bell for notifications, but then please download our app. Get our app, gilberthouse.org/app. Not only do you get all of our video content there, it's got a calendar of our upcoming events, a Bible module, multiple translations, audio Bible, in fact, and much, much more. We've actually also added access to our streaming video site. We keep forgetting to talk about that. We've got a bunch of streaming video presentations, our traveloguementaries. You follow us as we go through the Holy Land. Do all of that. It's at gilberthouse.org/video. But if you go to our app, look in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a new tab there that says Stream. Tap that. It takes you right to the website, and you can get access to these video presentations, documentaries, traveloguementaries in full HD, instant access for as little as $3. And we got a special coming up in February to reduce that even more. So do that. Now, the reason I'm saying do this, because YouTube decided to go back into the archives back to 2019. An interview I did with Dr. Gregory Reed, who's going to be one of the featured speakers at one of the conferences we'll be telling you about here shortly this year. He is an expert in satanic ritual abuse. And apparently, according to the gatekeepers at YouTube, the discussion we had was in violation of their community standards. Now, this was a discussion of Jeffrey Epstein, of trafficking of children, and specifically of ritual abuse. And I think it is very, very interesting, very, very interesting that that particular interview, which got that show, it was just deleted. Now, thankfully, they only deleted the show and not the entire channel here. But that was the same topic that got Skywatch TV canceled. I mean, the entire channel. So I'm not going to try to argue about this program, because when we did that at Skywatch TV, it's what got the entire channel canceled. We are, again, on our app. We will also look to expand over to Rumble. Started doing that, and we got so many archives, I think that Rumble was having trouble ingesting all of the video content that we've got up there. But the point is this. If you're depending on YouTube for your content, it's very likely that you're going to find channels that are trying to bring you truth and dealing with difficult subjects may wind up just getting, just disappearing. So while we will try to stay there as long as we can, we're not deliberately trying to provoke the gatekeepers, but we will try to stay there because it's Mars Hill. It's an opportunity. I mean, let's face it, that's where most people are, where most eyeballs are. And don't care about the clicks. We just care about getting out the information we have, the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And we don't really want to lose that Mars Hill platform. But the day may come where it is just taken away from us because we are dealing with subjects that they don't want discussed. So please download our app. Follow us at our website, gilberthouse.org, vftb.net, pidradio.com. We've got multiple locations out there. Just please don't depend on one particular video site to determine what you're allowed to see, because they may just take it away. And we do have other avenues, other channels for you to consume this content. Well, one of the bizarre stories that is, you really just can't make this up. I mean, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is targeted politically, that the legal issues that Donald Trump is facing are because he is right now the odds-on favorite to win not just the Republican nomination, but the entire election, the presidential election this coming November. Now, a lot can happen between now and November, obviously, but the deep state, it's not just Democrats, there are a lot of Republicans that don't like him either, are trying to make sure that he is not even on the ballot. There are some 30 states that are trying to eliminate, you just remove him from the ballot. Of course, we're seeing this with a lot of Republicans. So like 126 Republican members of Congress, the Democrats are trying to keep off the ballot, to remove from the ballot on the grounds that the 14th Amendment says that anybody connected with insurrection shouldn't be allowed to hold political office. It's not what was intended by the 14th Amendment when it was passed in the wake of the American Civil War, or the war between the states, if you prefer. Anyway, but we're seeing this with the district attorney in Manhattan filing federal charges against President Trump. I mean, a district attorney is not supposed to be able to file federal charges, and yet he's done it. In Washington, D.C., Jack Smith, special prosecutor, going after Trump for things that Democrats, including some very prominent congressional Democrats like Jamie Raskin, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, did after the 2016 election, questioning the results. In Fulton County, Georgia, using the RICO Act, racketeering charges against President Trump and against a number of co-defendants to go after President Trump. Bizarre, because, again, racketeering is the kind of thing that was intended to be used to roll up organized criminal gangs, and I don't think anybody seriously thinks Donald Trump was running an organized criminal operation. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, last week we learned in a court filing, a public court filing, apparently hired her married lover, private attorney Nathan Wade, as a special prosecutor. And as of last week, it was reported that Wade had been paid something like $650,000 of Georgia taxpayer money to investigate and bring charges against Trump. And then Wade allegedly turned around and spent a lot of that money taking Willis on very fancy vacations, cruises, and trips to rather expensive vacation destinations. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's astonishing to me. Now, first of all, Wade is reportedly not experienced in prosecuting felony cases, much less racketeering cases. It's a level of complexity, apparently, that requires some experience, which he does not have. And yet he's being paid top dollar, reportedly, for this job, while he's going through a divorce. And this is where the attorney for one of Trump's co-defendants got access to the transcript of the divorce case that Wade is in the middle of, and learned about some of this. So this is like, okay. Well, according to the New York Post, the judge overseeing the election fraud case against former President Trump has called a hearing over these accusations that District Attorney Fani Willis and her lead prosecutor had an inappropriate relationship. Hearing scheduled for February 15th. She's got until February 2nd to respond to these charges. The co-defendant, by the way, is Mike Roman, and it was his attorney who has filed this motion. The response by District Attorney Wade is, of course, to play the race card. Speaking in a church over this weekend, she said, and I quote, "You cannot expect black women to be perfect and save the world. We need to be allowed to stumble." I don't see what that has to do with anything. Nobody's expecting a black woman or anybody in this world to be perfect. Just expecting you to conduct yourself in your office with some professional ethics. I mean, because you're going after President Trump for violation of ethics, basically, election fraud. And then here you are, you're giving your lover a job for which he's not qualified, reportedly, paying him above top dollar, and then he's using the money and taking you out on these. Do you not see? Where's the mea culpa saying, okay, I shouldn't have done this. I'm sorry. I will recuse myself from the case. That would be the appropriate response here. But no, that's not what she said. And then, according to the New York Times, there was an exchange between the lawyers in the case against Trump and District Attorney Willis, with Willis telling defense lawyers in an email, quote, "Some people will never be able to respect African Americans," end quote. Well, what can you say to that? Other than bless her pointy little head. I've got a very busy year lining up, and that is the way we like it. We are, by the way, under contract now. We are working on getting a new book together, and we got to get that delivered by March 15th, which means when I get done here, I got to go back and type some words. But we will be doing some speaking around the country and even around the world if all comes together later this year. We'll be at the Hear the Watchman conference in Dallas, the Prophetic Signs in the Heavenlies conference. That is April 5th through 8th. That is April 5th is Thursday? Friday, April 5th through Sunday, April 7th. That's the speaking portion, but we're staying an extra day, and we encourage you to do so as well because that's when the total eclipse of the sun crosses the United States, and Dallas will be one of the best places in the country to see it. So join us, watch the prophetic sign in the heavenly. Who knows? Perhaps. We will be there, Sharon and me, alongside Dr. Michael Lake, David Heavener, Jamie Walden, Dave Hodges, Paul and Heidi Begley, Michael Bodea, David Paxton Tuvrose, Pastor Casper McLeod, and more. And we hope you will join us as well. Streaming video will be available. Information and registration at hearthewatchmen.com. In June, we'll be at His Call Ministries in Sparta, Missouri. This is a rather intimate weekend. Sharon and me doing all the talking Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning. And we encourage you to join us. His Call Ministries, Sparta, is about halfway between Springfield and Branson. And the Findlay River Ranch, a wonderful, very scenic location, and the Wades, just a wonderful couple. So we pray that you can join us for that. We will be in Ohio for the Go Therefore conference again this year. Dr. Mike Spalding, Kathy Spalding putting this together. That'll be Friday, July 26th, Saturday, July 27th of 2024. This is at the think, Derek, it is the why am I forgetting the name of the location? Pastor Neil Peterson, Harvest Revival Center. Thank you. There we go. Brookville, Ohio. L.A. Marzulli, Dr. Judd Burton, Pastor Carl Gallops, Dr. Michael Lake, Paul Begley, Dr. Gregory Reed. Don't miss that. And Dr. Mike Spalding, of course. This will be a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you there. Brookville, Ohio, suburban Dayton. So join us there. July 26th and 27th. Streaming video available as well. And when you register for the conference, you also get access to the video of the presentations from 2021 and 2022. Go therefore conference.com. And there is a good possibility, a good possibility we will be in Scotland the last weekend in October for the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. Information on that as soon as it's available. Our Israel tour is still scheduled for November 3rd through 12th of 2024, but the longer conflicts go in the Middle East, the greater the possibility we will need to delay again. But as of this point, we are still planning to be there on November 3rd with Timothy Alberino. Yes, we're aware that November 5th is Election Day here in the United States. You can vote early. You can vote absentee. I know a lot of people who are uncomfortable with that, but again, we're keeping an eye on the situation there, both politically and militarily, to determine whether we want to hold to that date or move. But if you do put down a deposit, here's the thing. Lipkin Tours has been very understanding. With our previous tour this past March, we had to delay it 4 times because of the pandemic. And there were some people who just circumstances changed. The new dates didn't work. They refunded deposits in full. So if you put down a deposit and then we move it and you can't accommodate the new dates, you will not be out any money. Find out more at gilbertsinisrael.com. That's gilbertsinisrael.com. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen to this program. Again, subscribe, share with your friends, and whether it's at Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever fine podcasts are sold, we appreciate you giving us a good review. Our announcer, the inimitable DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert. Good night, Oliver, wherever you are. This is A View from the Bunker.